Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee and this week I want to talk about wargaming on a budget. So this week I wanted to respond to a comment from last week's video that I received on Blue Sky. Now most of the respondents seemed suitably energized by last week's topic, but as always there were a handful, very small handful of negative comments, mostly from people who clearly hadn't watched the video, but that's beside the point. But amongst all those replies, and there was a lot of comments on the video last week, there was one really good question posed by someone on Blue Sky that I thought would make a really interesting discussion this week. And although I'm going to try and answer his question, it's going to be very much from my own personal perspective. So JD, known as Huzzah on Blue Sky, asked, are exorbitant prices and constant rule changes gouging your price book and hard-earned dollar? Now obviously this is a British channel, so replacing pocketbook with wallet and dollar with pound, I think I can approach this topic with a little bit of experience. So many moons ago, my original Dungeons and Dragons group that we all met at school, we started to get into tabletop wargaming, and like many others we began with what was available to us. So we ended up playing Warhammer Fantasy Battle and then expanded into Warhammer 40k and Epic. You know, Games Workshop was very big at the time. You know, it was a presence on our high street, and so we locked into those sort of games. And it wasn't long before we found ourselves in that cycle of buying the latest miniatures as they were released and upgrading whenever a new version of the rules came along. And even back then it was clear to us that Games Workshop's business model was pump out loads of miniatures along with supplementary rules until the original rule system was broken and needed to be replaced. And once that happened, they would issue a new edition and start the whole process again. Now while I haven't been a Games Workshop player in probably 25 years or more, it seems clear from what I've read and see online that their model hasn't changed that much, and it must be a success. They're a massive business. Now, if anything, the reliance on that continuous churn of releases and rules updates only seems to have intensified over the years, and it can create a feeling of financial pressure among players who want to stay current with the game. Some people find that this exhilarating, the joy of collecting new models, learning new rules and engaging with the latest set of rules that have come out. Others, however, see it as a relentless drain on their wallets. So the breaking point for me and why I moved away from Games Workshop, one of the factors that led our entire group in fact to explore different rule sets, and in my case moving to historical wargaming, it was just the sheer cost to keeping up with the latest releases and rules editions. I mean, one particular incident leaps to mind. We were all playing Warhammer Epic, science fiction game, 6mm models, and the final straw for us was a new edition of the rules came out and it completely changed the basing of all of the units. At a stroke, our entire armies were unusable unless we were willing to rebase them entirely. Now today, with more experience and a willingness to break and tweak the rules ourselves, we'd simply just ignore those basing changes and adapt the new rules as necessary. But back then we were younger, less experienced and less inclined to tinker with the rules. Now that push factor away from Games Workshop turned out to be a blessing in disguise. It forced me to broaden my horizons and look for alternatives. And for me, historical wargaming filled that gap perfectly. I suspect my story would be echoed by many of you watching this video. The shift from Games Workshop to other wargaming avenues wasn't just about saving money. It was about discovering a richer and more diverse gaming landscape. Now I don't for a second regret my entry into wargaming through fantasy and sci-fi games. In fact, I'm grateful for it because it eventually led me to historical wargaming, and that's why I don't see Games Workshop as some kind of evil empire. I don't view them as the pinnacle of the hobby either, but neither do I look down on players who enjoy their games and only ever want to play grim dark sci-fi. If that's what you love, then more power to you. And my personal experience, however, is that Games Workshop served as a gateway into the wider hobby, and for that I will always be thankful. Now, when I moved into historical wargaming, the decision seemed like a very economical one. Compared to the cost of staying current in Games Workshop games, historical wargaming felt like a financial relief. Of course there were expensive historical miniatures out there. I should know, I've spent a small fortune on my latest project. But the key difference is that historical wargaming offers far more options, as we discussed last week. There are affordable ranges, smaller scales, and an incredible variety of manufacturers to choose from. And I suspect that any dedicated Games Workshop player would likely be amazed at how much cheaper it is to play historical wargames. Of course, at this point it's worth talking about what are the real costs of wargaming. You know, break it down a little bit more. When we talk about the cost of wargaming, we need to consider various factors. For a start, the miniatures. Games Workshop miniatures are, without a doubt, among some of the most expensive on the market. Some of this is completely justified. They're high quality models, often with fantastic detail, dynamic sculpts, and an enormous amount of background material that goes with them. You know, that IP has some value. However, they are also priced in a way that maximises profit from a loyal and dedicated player base. In contrast, historical miniatures can be found at a fraction of the cost. Whether you're looking at plastic or metal, there are plenty of affordable options to the average historical wargamer. Then there's the rules and the supplements. Games Workshop has a very well established business model where core rules are released, followed by numerous supplementary books that often become essential if you want to stay competitive, particularly if you're a tournament type player. In contrast, many historical rule sets are designed to be relatively stable. Some have been around for decades with minimal changes, meaning you can buy a set of rules once and use them for years without worrying about constant updates. And then there's customization and flexibility. One of the best things about historical wargaming is the freedom to mix and match miniatures from different manufacturers, which is exactly what we were talking about last week. There's no single company dictating which modules you must buy. This flexibility allows players to be more budget conscious while still building great looking armies. Then I think there's community and that secondary market. Another factor that you should really consider is that secondary market. Games Workshop miniatures do hold their value well, but they also have a high initial price. In the historical community, second-hand miniatures are often more affordable, and there's a strong culture of sharing and trading. Now, at the end of the day, whether or not the cost of wargaming is an issue depends on your perspective. If you're deeply invested in Games Workshop's ecosystem and enjoy staying up to date with every new release, then you might not mind the expense. It's part of the hobby experience for you. But if you're someone who feels frustrated by the constant changes and escalating costs, then exploring alternative systems like historical wargames can be a game changer, and one that I would urge anyone to give a try. Now, for me, moving into historicals was both a financial and a creative decision. I found much greater variety, more freedom, and a hobby that felt less like an arms race of new releases. But that doesn't mean Games Workshop doesn't have its place. It's still an excellent gateway into the hobby, and for those who love it, provides a deeply immersive experience. So for that reason, I'm glad that that company exists and has a place on our high street and in our hobby. So return to the original question, are exorbitant prices and constant rule changes gouging your wallet? Well, I think you've probably worked it out by now. It largely depends on what you want out of the hobby. For some, it's a necessary cost of engagement. For others, it's a push factor, leading them to explore other more affordable avenues. Either way, the most important thing is to find the aspect of the wargaming that brings you the most joy, whether that's the latest Warhammer release or a deep dive into historical battles. As always, I would love to hear your perspective on this. Was your route into historical wargames the same as mine, or did you have a different perspective on this particular subject? So last week my topic was quite long and I didn't have time for a hobby update. However, I've had another busy week. I'd had 3 games that week across a range of formats, and wanted to quickly tell you about it in a bit of a hobby update this week. So first, Stuart ran a game in the Shed of War featuring his Hittites and Egyptians. Now these haven't been out on the games table for quite some time. It's certainly been several years since I've played with them, so I was really really looking forward to sort of relearning Stuart's very simple set of rules. And Sergeant and I took control of the Hittites while Chris had command of the better quality but slightly smaller Egyptian army. I was the Hittite commander, but to be honest, neither Sergeant nor I were really sure how the rules worked. It's been so long. So we sort of guessed at a strategy. I gave Sergeant control of all the chariots and we loaded up one wing while I had the heavy infantry and spearmen on the other flank, hoping to present an unappetising target for Chris's own chariots. In the centre we positioned more spearmen and a handful of archers to advance on the Egyptian centre. Now the first half of the game had Sergeant and I thinking we'd made a huge mistake and were on course for a thrashing. Chris's dice rolling was way above average for the whole game, and fire from his massed archers was quite devastating. However, in the second half of the game things slowly turned in our favour. Sergeant was eventually able to overwhelm the enemy flank with his chariots, and my spearmen had seen off a concerted attack on the left flank. In the centre we'd advanced as hard as we could and eventually was able to overwhelm and cut our way through the core of the Egyptian army in the centre. So Chris knew the writing was on the wall by that point and sensibly threw in the towel. Now a great game which I like to think everyone enjoyed, because we really, the pendulum swung both ways during that game and that was really quite enjoyable. Then on the Monday night some of the rejects gathered online for another game hosted by Jonathan Freitag. This time we were playing a Wild West shoot 'em up with a handful of outlaws versus a plucky band of Pinkertons. We actually had time for 2 gunfights, and John put out 2 excellent little write-ups of the action on his blog, the Police Wargaming Journal. I'll try to remember to put links in the description below and urge you to check them out. Now on Tuesday night it was the turn of my D&D group to meet online and continue our ongoing campaign game. Now I've been spending some time recently trying to update my campaign journal, trying to make sense of all of the overlapping clues and the side quests that are going on. D&D can sometimes be very combat orientated, so much so in fact that it can sometimes feel like a big skirmish war game. However, our current campaign is much more of a cerebral puzzle, for want of a better phrase, testing our alertness and our note-taking skills to the absolute maximum. We're still a long way from concluding the campaign, but as always we've had a very great evening of great conversation and laughter. So now time for a Workbench update. After such a busy week gaming, it's probably no surprise that it ate into my painting time considerably. So last week I'd only managed to paint 4 officers rather than a whole new unit. 2 mounted officers from Perry Miniatures, cast as a single model. These 2 not wearing any greatcoats, unlike pretty much all of the rest of my army. Maybe they're just harder men, or maybe they're foolhardy, I don't know. I did consider copying Ray and adding some green stuff, coats and scarves and so on, but decided against that because I just didn't want to have, well, A, I didn't have time, and because I didn't want to obscure all the detail on the uniforms. For the first and probably the last time this project, I've had a chance to paint dark green jackets and brass buttons and silver braid, and I'm rather happy with how these came out. I was also able to get a couple of foot officers painted up, and I think these are foundry figures. One is wrapped in a long grey coat while the other wears only a frock coat. I think I may have made a mistake with this guy because I copied a picture I had so the whole figure is in grey, but now I think I probably boo-booed a little bit there and his frock coat should have been dark green. I'm not sure, but it's too late now, he'll have to do as he is. I have a few more officers to paint, so I'll have plenty of choice when Ray and I finally get around to playing a game. Now this week I've had a much more productive time at the Workbench, finishing off a unit of Smolensk Dragoons and prepping 2 line units which are on my desk now, which should be finished hopefully, cross fingers, for next week's submission date in the painting challenge. Now by 1812 there were somewhere around 37 Dragoon regiments in the Russian army. This had risen from a low of about 15 back in 1801. 1812 appears to be a high watermark because in December of that year, partially in response to battle losses, some of the regiments seem to have been converted into cuirassier regiments, and some of the more reduced, more battle damaged regiments were absorbed into equally understrength Hussar regiments. Now, the Russ and Dragoon uniform for 1812 was largely established in the 1807 changes, with troops wearing a dark green jacket with coloured facings and collars of various colours. Now, the yellow cuffs can't be seen on these figures because they're wearing greatcoats, but the yellow collars and the trim around the shabraks, that's the saddlecloths, reveal that this unit is the Smolensk Dragoons, originally formed as part of Catherine the Great's army in the previous century. Troopers wore grey trousers, often reinforced with black leather, with black brass buttoned leggings and black boots. So that's it for this week. As always, please join the conversation in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and share. And if you want to keep up to date with weekly content from the channel, please tap the bell notification icon. So until next week, stay safe, keep gaming, and of course keep rolling high.